Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping straight into a profound paradigm shift that could literally transform how you view your everyday reality. Because, let's be honest, if you've ever had that fleeting feeling that the physical world around you is somehow incomplete or just an illusion, well, the framework we're exploring today is going to give you an incredibly powerful new lens to see your life through. We're pulling this directly from the first chapter of a fascinating text called The Silent Buddha, which unpacks the fundamental teachings of Buddhism, known as the 3 Marks of Existence. This source really aims to demystify some pretty complex spiritual philosophy to reveal the voiceless voice of enlightenment. But more than that, it's a highly practical guide. It's designed to break down our most stubborn illusions, which is absolutely crucial for anyone seeking a clearer, more grounded perspective on life. Now, to truly grasp these concepts, the text hits us right away with a powerful thought from the great Zen master Dogen Zenji. He talks about listening not with the ears, but with the whole body. What does that actually mean for us? It signals that we have to move beyond our limited physical senses to perceive a much deeper eternal truth. If we try to box this up using just our everyday conventional logic, we're going to miss the entire profound message. So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at the illusion of reality, time and impermanence, space and non-self, awakening through nirvana, and finally, emptiness and altruism. Let's dive right in. Section 1. The illusion of reality. Section 2. Time and impermanence. To wake us up from the illusion of our daily reality, the text actually deconstructs time to break our attachments. Think about it. We are so used to seeing our current circumstances as fixed and solid, right? But the Buddhist perspective aggressively challenges that. And that brings us to the first fundamental mark of existence, shoujo mujo, or impermanence. From a strictly temporal perspective, the teaching is that absolutely everything changes and nothing remains constant. In the eternal flow of time, no physical object, no situation, and definitely no biological body lasts forever. It's basically the universe's ultimate unbroken rule. The source paints some really vivid imagery to show this impermanence in action. We're talking about bustling towns that eventually turn into empty, quiet fields, towering mountains that erode over millennia to become ocean floors, and of course, the ever-flowing river that literally never holds the exact same water twice. It makes the takeaway incredibly clear. Clinging to temporary things and expecting them to stay the same is the absolute root cause of human suffering. Section 3, Space and Non-Self. Okay, so having completely deconstructed time, the text now turns to deconstruct space, and with it, our very sense of identity. This is the second mark of existence, shoho muga, or non-self. This concept strips away the comforting idea that there is any permanent, unchanging self-nature in the physical objects or bodies we see around us. From a spatial perspective, everything is essentially empty of a permanent physical core. Now, that doesn't mean things aren't here right now in front of us. It just means they exist only temporarily due to a specific set of causes and conditions. And the text makes a really crucial contrast here. It bluntly describes our false self, which is our physical body built by the 5 senses, as just a temporary leather bag filled with water. I know, it's a little harsh maybe, but it absolutely nails the point. If you think you are just this physical body, you are actively being deceived. On the flip side of that coin, we have the true self. This self is spiritual, it's eternal, and it's sustained by the invisible, harmonious energy of the divine or God and Buddha. Denying that physical false self is basically step 1 to discovering your true self. So, that leads to a pretty stark question, perfectly mirroring the source text's profound inquiry. If time changes everything, and space is essentially empty of any permanent substance, then who exactly is the I standing here right now? It completely flips the old Western philosophy of I think, therefore I am on its head. It pushes us to realize that the I we think is trapped in time and space isn't the real you at all. The real you exists totally beyond these dimensions. Section 4. Awakening and Nirvana. Answering that profound question brings us to the third mark, Nihanja Kujo, or Nirvana. And we need to clarify something. This isn't some mystical, faraway place in the clouds. It is a state of ultimate freedom and peace achieved right here, right now. How? By realizing these truths and just letting go of all those attachments. It is the profound discovery of the eternal true self that exists perfectly at the intersection of time and space, completely unbound by the chaotic, constant changes of the physical world. Now, there's a very important distinction made in the source material that we absolutely have to touch on. It specifically warns that realizing this emptiness isn't some dark, depressing retreat into nothingness or nihilism.
It's the exact opposite, actually. It's a joyous liberation. The text uses this fantastic metaphor, comparing it to breaking free from the tiny, restrictive eggshell or cocoon of our physical limitations, so we can finally step into a vastly larger, eternal reality.
Section 5. Emptiness and Altruism.
Because here's the thing. Once you achieve this ultimate peace, you don't just go sit quietly on a mountaintop for the rest of your life. We pivot from the initial realization of true emptiness, no form, which simply means knowing everything is an illusion and cutting off your attachments, to something much more profound. It's called true emptiness, wondrous being. This means returning to the world, knowing full well it's an illusion, but finding the miraculous light and mercy of the divine right in the middle of it. This evolution launches what the text calls the bodhisattva path. It's an active life, totally overflowing with great compassion, dedicated to guiding others out of their suffering. So, the entire journey laid out in the text actually acts as a really clear 3-step guide. First, you deny the false self constructed by the physical senses. Second, you discover your true eternal self living within. And third, and this is really the most important part, you use that newly enlightened perspective to live actively for others. This is the absolute essence of true altruism, evolving your own soul while actively lifting up everyone around you in this temporary physical world. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to really chew on. Knowing that the physical world is entirely temporary and that your true self is eternal, are you ready to let go of the illusion? Will you look at the world and the people in it with a completely new set of eyes and a heart of great compassion? The path is laid out right in front of us. Keep learning, keep seeking, and keep looking beyond the illusion. All right, welcome back, everyone. I am so thrilled you're here for another explainer today. We are jumping straight into a profound philosophical puzzle right off the bat, and it's one that might completely reframe how you think about personal growth and, well, helping other people. We're going to explore a framework of ancient wisdom that can literally take your everyday, mundane struggles, like grinding away studying for an exam or just trying to kick a bad habit, and cast them in a totally new, incredibly empowering light. Let's dive right in. So, I want to kick things off with a question that honestly sounds a bit backward at first. Can focusing entirely on yourself actually be the most selfless thing you do? I mean, usually we think of selflessness as giving away all our time and energy to others, right? And selfishness is hoarding all of that for ourselves. But what if the ultimate path of true compassion actually requires an intense, almost obsessive level of self-improvement? Hold on to that thought because we're going to unpack exactly how that actually works. To figure this out, we're pulling straight from a genuinely fascinating text called The Silent Buddha by Ryuho Okawa. And what's really cool about this source is what it's trying to do. It aims to decode the quiet, unspoken teachings of spiritual practice. It makes the case that the real key to grasping profound wisdom isn't just found in reading words on a page, but in the actual daily mechanics of how you practice and train your mind. And today, we're going to unravel the absolute core of that philosophy. Specifically, we are zeroing in on Chapter 2, the 4 Great Vows, or Shiku Seigon. These are the fundamental, ultimate pledges you make when aspiring to the highest enlightenment. So, what are these overarching pledges? Well, here they are. First, save all sentient beings. Second, eradicate all earthly desires. Third, master all Buddhist teachings. And fourth, attain supreme enlightenment. The text points out that these 4 pledges act as what it calls overarching vows. Basically, they're the massive, unshakable pillars meant to support every single other tiny goal you could possibly have in your life. So let's break them down one by one to see how they actually function in the real world. Let's look at the first vow and just take a second to appreciate the sheer scale of this. Sentient beings are boundless. I vow to save them. The book notes that while sentient beings technically means all living things, it's primarily focused on humans here, and the scale is just staggering. The author uses the global population as an example, saying even if there are 5.5 billion, 8 million, or 10 billion people on Earth, the pledge is to guide every single one of them to the shores of enlightenment. It's this incredibly beautiful, impossibly massive promise. Basically, this first vow is all about pure, boundless altruism, or Rita. It's the absolute ultimate expression of selflessness. It's a vow of pure compassion that essentially says, I am going to work to uplift absolutely everyone, no exceptions. It's an entirely outward-facing, totally selfless mission. But then we hit the second vow,
Bonno Mujin Seigendan. Earthly desires are inexhaustible. I vow to eradicate them. And this is where the wisdom gets super practical and, frankly, very relatable. The author explains that these earthly desires, these worldly passions, they pop up constantly, every single day. The text gives a great example. Say you're perfectly calm, totally focused, and then a really attractive person walks by. Your eyes wander, and boom, you lose your focus. That exact moment of distraction is when you were supposed to silently recite this vow so you can cut off that worldly desire and immediately recenter your mind. Okay, moving on to the third vow, Hamen Muryo Seigangaku. Buddhist teachings are countless. I vow to master them. This means vowing to learn absolutely everything there is to know about the truth. And again, the source gives us a brilliant everyday example. Imagine you just get a terrible score on the test. You're crushed. You feel like completely giving up on studying altogether. Well, this is the precise moment you should invoke this third vow. It reminds you that the path of learning is infinite, and you just have to push through that temporary frustration to keep growing.
And finally, the fourth vow, Buddhu Mujo Seiganjo. Supreme enlightenment is unattainable. I vow to achieve it. True perfection can feel entirely out of reach, right? Like a flower blooming on a peak you can't even climb. But you vow to get there anyway. The practical application? Think about when you see someone who is just incredibly talented, someone who speaks brilliantly or studies flawlessly, and you suddenly feel utterly inadequate. You think, I could never be that good, I'm just going to give up. That is exactly when you use this fourth vow to ground yourself and renew your commitment to your own ultimate potential.
Okay, hold up. Time out for a second. Did you catch what just happened? We started with this incredibly grand, totally selfless mission to save the entire world. But what about those other three vows? Eradicating my desires, mastering teachings for myself, achieving my own enlightenment. Aren't vows 2, 3, and 4 entirely about me?
There's a pretty glaring contradiction staring us in the face here. Vow 1 is pure altruism, rija, working for others. But vows 2, 3, and 4, they look suspiciously like self-benefit, or riji, working on yourself. If you are supposed to be practicing this path of universal love and boundless compassion, why does the vast majority of your core mission suddenly look like an intense, hyper-focused self-improvement program?
The source text actually calls this out perfectly. It's the paradox of the bodhisattva. Think about it. Does it really make sense that an enlightened being, totally dedicated to saving the world, would spend 75% of their core vows acting seemingly selfishly? Focusing entirely inward on their own mind, their own learning, and their own enlightenment? And here is the massive aha moment of the whole text. The author states, when we analyze these 4 vows closely, we understand they are built on a double structure, or in Japanese, a niju kozo. The text reveals that these aren't just some random list of spiritual promises. There is a hidden, highly logical architecture sitting right beneath these ancient vows that completely bridges the gap between the self and others. Let's actually unlock this double structure using the logic from the text. First off, you simply cannot pull someone else out of the mud of suffering if you are still stuck in it yourself, right? Eradicating your own desires isn't just for your benefit. It's so you can figure out the exact mechanics of how to help others extinguish the flames of their suffering. Same goes for mastering teachings. It's not about hoarding knowledge so you can feel smart. It's about acquiring the necessary tools so you can effectively teach and guide others out of their own ignorance. Literally, every single inward action has an outward purpose. Which leads us perfectly into this incredibly beautiful, unifying phrase from the text. Seeking enlightenment above, saving sentient beings below. What the source makes crystal clear is that self-benefit and altruism, they are actually the exact same thing, just looking in different directions. You cannot possibly save the boundless sentient beings of vow 1 without the intense, gritty self-perfection of vows 2, 3, and 4. Elevating yourself isn't selfish. It is the required preparation for elevating the world.
So how does this actually play out in your normal day-to-day life? Well, the text makes a really helpful distinction between overarching vows and individual vows. Individual vows are your personal everyday goals, passing a certification exam, securing that promotion at work, or maybe just learning a new language. But the big argument here is that the 4 great vows should be the universal foundation beneath all of those individual goals. You don't just study to get a good grade for yourself. You study as part of your overarching vow to master knowledge so you can eventually use it to help others.
So the big takeaway here is this 3-step cycle of true selflessness. Step 1, radically improve yourself by cutting out your bad habits and desires. Step 2, attain profound wisdom by learning relentlessly. Step 3, use that refined self and that deep, hard-earned knowledge to uplift everyone around you. Realizing this empowers us to see that true self-improvement is never actually selfish. It is the absolute non-negotiable foundation for being of service to the rest of the world.
I want to wrap up today's explainer with a question that I really hope sticks with you. Directly inspired by the text, who are you elevating yourself to save today? The next time you sit down to study when you're tired, or hit the gym, or resist a bad habit, remember this double structure. You aren't just doing it for you. You're actively building the strength, the wisdom, and the enlightenment required to pull someone else up. Keep focusing, keep learning, and I will catch you in the next explainer.
Okay, let's dive right into today's explainer. We're exploring a seriously fascinating concept from Chapter 3 of our source material, and it's all about the true purpose of Buddhist precepts, or kairitsu. If you've ever felt, a bit overwhelmed by rigid religious rules, you'll definitely want to stick around to see how this ancient framework actually operates. So think about this for a second. Do rules restrict us, or do they actually free us? Modern society often views rules as rigid chains, right? Things meant to just hold us down. But today, we're going to explore how these ancient spiritual guidelines were actually designed as the ultimate key to unlocking absolute mental freedom. To demystify all of this, here's our roadmap. We're going to cover the foundation of practice, Kai versus Ritsu, the 5 and 10 precepts, flexible rule creation, and wrap up with the path to true freedom.
All right, starting us off with Section 1, the foundation of practice, specifically the threefold training.
The entire Buddhist path relies on this really fascinating linear dependency called the threefold training, or Sangekku. And you really have to notice the specific order here: precepts, then meditation, then wisdom. The kicker is that you absolutely cannot just jump straight to wisdom. There's no shortcut. You've got to first observe the precepts to calm the static of your daily life. That behavioral calmness is what allows the mind to enter true meditation. And only out of that deep, deep focus can genuine wisdom actually emerge.
Moving right along to Section 2, Kai versus Ritsu, internal versus external.
Now this is super interesting. The actual word kairitsu literally breaks down into two completely distinct concepts. Kai acts as your voluntary, personal moral compass. Think of it as a profound, self-driven vow stemming purely from your own desire for enlightenment. Ritsu, on the other hand, well, that represents collective, regulated societal laws. These are strictly necessary with actual penalties to maintain order in a religious community or sangha.
Next up, Section 3, the 5 precepts, or rules for lay believers.
So what does this actually look like for us everyday lay believers? Well, these voluntary vows basically take the shape of the 5 precepts. We're talking not to kill, which connects right back to the core concept of ahimsa: not to steal, not to commit sexual misconduct, not to lie, and not to drink intoxicants. And look, these aren't just there to arbitrarily spoil your fun. Not at all. They actively prevent chaos and suffering from taking root in your life, laying the essential groundwork for that calm mind we just talked about.
All right, Section 4, the 10 good precepts and regulating the mind.
As we move into Mahayana Buddhism, the whole framework expands big time. It goes way beyond just physical actions to actually target the psychological drivers of our behavior. By categorizing the 10 good precepts into body, speech, and mind, the system becomes, well, incredibly comprehensive. Think about it. Regulating an angry or greedy thought becomes literally just as vital as controlling a physical action. The entire battlefield of discipline moves inward.
And here's a crucial point. This isn't just about avoiding bad behavior. Beyond shijikai, which are the prohibitive rules, the texts also heavily outline sajikai. These are affirmative, active duties you absolutely must perform. This is exactly where community rules like the Pratamoksha come into play, requiring regular gatherings to recite rules and reflect together. You can't just isolate yourself in a cave. You have to actively participate in the good.
Which brings us to Section 5, creating rules flexibly, looking at a living code. You might imagine the historical Buddha just, handing down this massive, rigid rule book on day one. But the historical reality? It's beautifully human. Through this concept called Zuihan Zuisei, rules were established incredibly flexibly. Basically, a new rule was generally only created after someone in the community actually messed up. It shows Buddha as an incredibly adaptable leader who was just managing deeply flawed humans in real time.
Now, of course, some mess-ups were handled way more severely. The absolute gravest offenses, known as parajika, resulted in immediate and permanent expulsion.
We're talking about things like a monk falsely claiming to have supernatural enlightenment, just to deceive followers. The integrity of the community had to be protected at all costs from that kind of spiritual fraud. No second chances there. But you really have to contrast that kind of permanent banishment with minor slip-ups. Say a practitioner accidentally ate forbidden meat because they were just overwhelmingly hungry. Well, that didn't end their spiritual journey forever. It merely required a simple period of reflection and a public confession to clear their conscience. The system scaled the response perfectly to the intention and severity of the action.
And finally, Section 6, Path to True Freedom, Purifying the Mind.
As the source material beautifully puts it, the ultimate goal of all these rules is not punishment, but the purification of the mind. I mean, that right there is the entire key to everything we've discussed today. Whether we're talking about the personal, voluntary vows of Kai or the strict community regulations of Ritsu, the reality is that every single rule exists solely to clear away the daily static. That is exactly how the mind achieves the profound stillness required for enlightenment.
So, I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. If absolute freedom actually requires a perfectly calm mind, what modern precepts do you need to set for yourself today? Because the undeniable logic laid out in this text is pretty striking. If you can't control your actions and your environment, you're never going to be able to control your mind. Really makes you think, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Welcome back. You know, if you've ever sat down after a long, exhausting day, closed your eyes, and realized your mind is just completely overwhelmed with a million racing thoughts, well, you are definitely not alone. The modern world is literally chaotic, and it leaves our minds absolutely buzzing. But what if I told you that over 2,000 years ago, ancient Buddhist practitioners developed a highly specific medical-grade toolkit to diagnose and treat those exact mental storms? It's true. Today, in this explainer, we're going to explore some ancient prescriptions for a modern chaotic mind.
Okay, let's dive into this. It is incredibly frustrating when you try to meditate or even just relax on the couch and your brain just won't shut off. Why is it so hard to just sit and clear your mind? Well, the source text we're examining today makes a brilliant point. Trying to achieve deep meditation with a stormy, agitated mind is kind of like trying to sail a tiny boat in a Category 5 hurricane. You're gonna capsize. No way around it. We often beat ourselves up for being bad at meditating, but the reality is we're skipping a vital preliminary step. We're trying to find deep, profound insights while our minds are still thrashing around in the turbulent waters of daily life.
So, here's our agenda for today's explainer. 1. Calming the mental storm. 2. The 5 diagnostic methods. 3. Treating desire and anger. 4. Dismantling ignorance and ego. 5. Taming the scattered mind. And finally, 6. The stepping stones.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Calming the Mental Storm.
So in Buddhist practice, there's this foundational concept called samatha, which translates to stopping or calming. The text stresses over and over that you simply cannot achieve deep, profound meditation, which is known as dhyana, with a chaotic mind. Samatha is the absolutely crucial first step. It's all about stopping the ripples. Think of your mind like a giant lake. If the wind is howling and the water is super choppy, you can't see anything below the surface, right? Samatha is the practice of calming that wind and letting the water become perfectly still so you can finally look down and actually see the bottom.
Moving on to Section 2, the 5 diagnostic methods. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where these teachings come from. Our diagnostic toolkit today comes straight from this source text, detailing the path of early practitioners who, believe it or not, face the exact same human emotions we do today. This chapter introduces the 5 methods of quieting the mind, or Gojo Shinkan. These are the initial essential steps to suppress all those mental disturbances.
This right here is the heart of the Goshinkan. Ancient Buddhist practice wasn't just some vague advice to breathe deeply and hope for the best. It was highly specific. I mean, if you went to a doctor with a broken arm, they wouldn't give you cough medicine, right? Here are the targeted prescriptions for distinct mental symptoms. Got burning desire? The prescription is meditation on impurity. Anger and hatred? Compassion. Complaints and ignorance? Causality. Ego and vanity? Elements. And for that scattered distraction we all feel? Counting breaths. Let's break these down one by one.
All right, Section 3, Treating Desire and Anger.
Okay, so the crucial point is how we handle burning desire. Whether that's an overwhelming sexual urge
or an insatiable greed for material stuff. The ancient prescription is the meditation on impurity, or fujokan. And I'll be honest, it is a stark, shocking method. The text describes how ancient practitioners in India would actually go to graveyards. They would literally observe decaying physical forms or visualize a beautiful living body turning into white bones. Why? Because visualizing the ultimate impermanence and impurity of the physical form instantly cools the flames of intense desire. When you really internalize that the object of your lust or greed is temporary and ultimately decays, that burning attachment is severed. It's extreme, for sure, but it works like a bucket of ice water on a raging fire.
But what if your symptom isn't desire, but anger? Contrast the previous method with the meditation on compassion. This one is specifically for those consumed by hatred and rage towards someone, maybe a boss, a neighbor, or a toxic family member. Instead of sitting in that egocentric hatred, the text advises shifting to a completely egalitarian view. By consciously viewing absolutely everyone equally as children of God or Buddha, you totally shift your mindset. You stop focusing on how they wronged you, and instead you focus on a genuine wish to relieve their suffering and bring them joy. It neutralizes that toxic boiling anger by replacing it with universal empathy.
Section 4. Dismantling Ignorance and Ego. Now, if you find yourself constantly complaining, playing the victim, or just feeling aggrieved by how unfair life is, your prescription is the meditation on causality. This tackles ignorance head-on. The practice here is to objectively observe dependent origination, which is basically the universal law of cause and effect. Instead of whining about an outcome, you objectively trace back the logical causes that led to it. When you realize that every single effect has a logical cause, you remove the emotional victimhood right out of the equation. It basically forces you to take responsibility and stops that endless, draining loop of grievances.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the cure for ego and vanity. It's called the meditation on the divisions of elements. Let's say you're incredibly proud of your intelligence or your looks, and it's making you pretty arrogant. This meditation asks you to logically deconstruct yourself into your fundamental components. The text specifically mentions the 18 elements. You realize that even those brilliant brain cells you're so proud of, they're dying every single day. By recognizing your components will eventually perish, you literally logic your own swollen ego out of existence.
Next up, Section 5. Taming the Scattered Mind. If your mind is just scattered in a million different directions with worldly thoughts, like most of us today, your prescription is the meditation on counting breaths, or Susoku-kan. It is a highly practical, actionable method. You inhale calmly, you exhale slowly, and you count that breath cycle, 1, then 2. You continue up to 10 and then repeat, or go all the way up to 100. It sounds so incredibly simple, doesn't it? But by giving your hyperactive mind a numerical sequence to anchor onto, you crowd out all those distracting worldly thoughts. You are literally giving your mind a singular, boring task to perform so it finally stops chasing every shiny distraction.
Finally, Section 6. The Stepping Stones. So you might be wondering, where do I even start with all this? Well, the source text actually notes that some of the other methods like causality and elements can be conceptually pretty difficult to grasp at first. So it highly recommends that beginners focus primarily on the first method, meditation on impurity, to cool sudden desires, and the fifth method, counting breaths, to focus a scattered mind. These two are the absolute best, most accessible entry points for anyone looking to establish a baseline of peace today.
And this brings us to the ultimate realization of this explainer. These 5 methods are incredibly powerful, yes, but they are not the finish line. As the text makes crystal clear, quieting the mental fluctuations is merely the absolute prerequisite. You stop the storm so you can finally begin the real work of awakening true wisdom and self-discovery. They're just the necessary stepping stones to a much deeper understanding of yourself and the universe.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to reflect on. Between burning desire, anger, complaining, vanity, and distraction, which of the 5 mental disturbances do you need to write a prescription for tonight? You've got the tools now. Use them. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I truly hope you find some calm in your mental storm today. Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling something absolutely huge. We are going to be demystifying the ultimate goal of Buddhist training, the profound concept of wisdom, or as it's traditionally called, prajna. Seriously, if you've ever found yourself wondering how to just cut through the constant noise of daily life and actually see the world clearly, you are in the exact right place.
All right, let's dive right in. Every single insight we're going over today comes straight from Ryuho Okawa's fascinating writings detailing the final stage of Buddhist training. We're going to unpack exactly what it really means to transition from everyday conventional thinking to a genuine state of enlightened understanding.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at what true wisdom actually is, innate versus acquired wisdom, intellect versus transcendental wisdom, the non-duality perspective, and finally, seeing things as they are.
Okay, part 1. What is true wisdom? And spoiler alert, it's way beyond just being smart.
You know, we really got to ask ourselves, what actually separates profound wisdom from just having a high IQ? Well, the text starts by introducing this term shotoku-e, or innate wisdom. And honestly, this is kind of comforting. It means we don't start from zero. Shotoku-e is our built-in baseline capacity to grasp universal truths without anyone explicitly teaching them to us. Every single one of us is born with a spark of this.
There's this perfect example in the text. It points out that a child instinctively recognizes the beauty of a flower way before they're ever taught the vocabulary word for beautiful, right? I mean, they don't need a textbook to feel pure joy when handed a toy. That raw, unconditioned recognition of value and beauty, that is your innate wisdom operating in everyday life.
Moving on to part 2, innate versus acquired wisdom, the structured ascent.
So, innate wisdom is a great starting point, but it won't get us to the highest states of being on its own. We need what the source calls acquired wisdom, which is mapped out as the 3 wisdoms. Step 1 is the wisdom from hearing, literally just absorbing the knowledge. Step 2 is the wisdom from thinking, really chewing on it and deeply contemplating it until it logically makes sense. And finally, step 3 is the wisdom from practicing, embodying that knowledge through your daily actions and meditation. Now let's just pause here for a second, because that last step, practice, is absolutely vital. The goal of climbing this whole staircase isn't just to memorize a bunch of fancy words so you can sound smart at a dinner party. The text emphasizes that actual physical practice is what extinguishes the flames of our worldly desires and our ego, moving from just memorizing to true spiritual embodiment. That's where the real magic happens.
All right, part 3, intellect versus transcendental wisdom, the big contrast.
So here is the core contrast of today's explainer. We have vijnana, which is basically everyday intellect. This is that practical, two-dimensional intelligence that our modern society absolutely loves and rewards. It's all about analyzing data, categorizing things, and maximizing workplace efficiency. Like, if you are an absolute wizard at optimizing a spreadsheet, you are wielding vijnana very effectively.
But look at how the source contrasts that everyday intellect with prajna, or transcendental wisdom. Vijnana is all about analyzing, dividing, focusing heavily on the ego and strictly judging things as good or evil. Prajna, on the other hand, operates entirely differently. It integrates. It comprehensively grasps the whole picture, and it views the self and others completely equally. It's a huge invitation to step up into a much higher, more unified state of mind.
So you might be thinking, what's the actual problem with just relying on our everyday intellect? Well, while it's super handy for practical stuff, vijnana has some real limits. It is incredibly prone to ego. It gets us stuck in what the source calls dualistic thinking, meaning it constantly forces these rigid black and white divisions of good and evil onto a really complicated world. When we only use intellect, we're basically just judging, constantly analyzing, and ultimately isolating ourselves from the people around us.
Which brings us to part 4, the non-duality perspective, moving beyond division.
Here's where the source offers a solution to all that stress caused by rigid thinking. Zen aku funi, which means the non-duality of good and evil. Now, this can be a bit of a head-scratcher for our everyday intellect. It essentially means looking at seemingly opposing forces not as absolute enemies that have to destroy each other, but as necessary parts of one unified whole. It's a highly elevated, completely impartial viewpoint.
And when we actually tap into this state of prajna, transcendental wisdom, it naturally creates this equal, loving view of all living things. Instead of slapping a good or bad label on people, prajna lets us look at everyone, ourselves included, and see the absolute brilliance in our mutual struggles. It's not just about mechanical fairness, it's a really profound spiritual equality.
Finally, part 5, seeing things as they are, the ultimate goal. This is it. This is the top of the staircase we've been climbing all day. No Jitsu Chiken. It is the ultimate state of seeing things exactly as they are. No ego, no personal bias, no past conditioning distorting your view. It is literally the ultimate cure to ego-driven suffering because you completely stop projecting your own insecurities onto the world around you.
To explain this, the test uses this incredibly powerful metaphor, the clear, round mirror. Think about it. When you look into a flawless mirror, it doesn't judge what it sees. It simply reflects. Prajna is exactly like that mirror. It reflects the self, it reflects others, and it reflects the world with absolute crystal clarity, totally free from adding any layers of personal prejudice.
Okay, so how do we actually get this mirror mind? The source lays out some real practical steps. We have to actively work to strip away those deep-seated biases we've been lugging around since childhood. We need to completely abandon extreme viewpoints, and we do this by practicing what Buddhists call the middle way, which means avoiding the extremes of self-indulgence and extreme self-denial. Do that, and you start approaching the world as a complete blank slate.
Now, why does clearing out all this mental conditioning actually matter for you and me on a random Tuesday? Because our prejudices and our constant, rigid judgments are the exact things causing our lack of peace. When we drop them and look at the world as a blank slate, we literally stop fighting reality. We just see it, we understand it, and we navigate it with a calm, centered wisdom.
Which leads me to a final question to leave you with today. Take a real, honest look at your own daily perceptions. Are you just using your intellect to analyze the world so you can judge it? Or are you actively cultivating that clear, round mirror of wisdom, reflecting the world so you can truly understand it? It's a massive distinction, and one that just might change how you see everything. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep climbing that staircase of wisdom.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to dive into the truly profound concept of true liberation, and we're basically going to map out a step-by-step ascent to lasting inner peace. We'll be looking at this deeply fascinating roadmap for the mind, exploring exactly how we can all untangle ourselves from the absolute chaos of everyday life.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll figure out what is true liberation. Then we'll move through Stage 1, faith and trust, Stage 2, deep meditation, and Stage 3, illuminating wisdom, before wrapping it all up with the ultimate state, complete freedom.
All right, let's just jump right in. We've structured this whole explainer as a metaphorical climb up a mountain. And our trail guide for this climb, we're drawing our insights directly from Chapter 6 of the Silent Buddha. Think of this text as your literal map. It takes this incredibly lofty philosophical concept and breaks it down into a rigorous, step-by-step methodology for untangling the mind. And honestly, it feels so incredibly relevant in our fast-paced modern world.
Okay, Section 1. What is true liberation?
Let's start our ascent by defining exactly what mountain we're even climbing here, because before we can break free, we need to understand what freedom actually looks like. There is this absolutely crucial distinction made in the text between two concepts that, frankly, get blurred together all the time. Think of liberation, or vimoksha, as the active, sometimes arduous but highly rewarding climb. It's the physical process of untying those knots. Nirvana, on the other hand, that's the serene view from the summit. It's the resulting state of deep peace and stability that only comes after the hard work of liberation is done.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates the core problem we face today. Modern society so often confuses freedom with just indulging our desires, right? We tend to think freedom is just doing whatever we want whenever our physical impulses dictate. But the text argues that this is actually a massive trap. True freedom is the liberation from those exact attachments. It's escaping those three-dimensional material constraints to find a lasting, unshakable stability in your mind.
To reach that level of true freedom, the text outlines a very clear progression of spiritual evolution. It's not some magic overnight transformation, it's a systematic journey. So let's walk through these distinct base camps together, starting from the very bottom.
Which brings us to Stage 1, faith and trust.
Our very first step on this journey requires a fundamental shift in our mindset. We literally have to overcome the heaviest anchor holding us down, which is our own cynicism. Liberation by faith is centered entirely on overcoming worldly doubt. It means looking past these purely materialistic worldviews and firmly believing in divine truth. The text points out that there are just so many people wrapped up in rigid skepticism, totally disconnected from the spiritual reality of the universe. Overcoming that doubt, that is the absolute prerequisite for the entire climb.
By stepping away from wrong values, cynical skepticism, and false teachings, you take your first crucial step. In Buddhist terms, this is often called entering the stream. I love that imagery. It means you've successfully navigated away from the destructive currents of the world and placed yourself into the positive, upward flow of spiritual growth. You know, you aren't at the peak yet, but you are finally, for sure, on the right path.
Moving right along to Section 3, Stage 2, Deep Meditation.
Once we're securely on that path, we have to focus on quieting the relentless noise of the outside world through liberation by meditation. The key here is calming your mental fluctuations. You have to escape the constant, chaotic material vibrations of daily conflict. But take a look at that last point. The text specifically warns against harsh physical asceticism. You know, things like starving yourself or holding your breath to the point of pain. True intuition and spiritual connection just don't come from torturing the physical body. They actually emerge from a highly relaxed, receptive, bright, and harmonious state of meditation.
But here's the catch. A calm mind is really just the prep work. It's like wiping a dirty mirror clean. Now that we can actually see clearly, we have to actively dismantle the false beliefs and structural illusions that hold us back every single day.
And that leads us to Section 4, Stage 3, Illuminating Wisdom. This brings us to a highly rational, super-analytical stage of the climb, liberation by wisdom. While the earlier stages feel deeply internal and maybe more emotion-driven, this stage requires sharp intellect and deep reflection. Your goal here is to overcome what the text calls avidya, or fundamental ignorance. You are actively using divine knowledge to untie the complex intellectual knots in your own mind.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, you use your insight, or prajna, to rationally analyze life. You come to deeply understand the impermanence of the physical world, basically knowing that everything changes and literally nothing lasts forever. You also realize the concept of non-self, understanding that you're part of a much greater whole. By logically recognizing that the physical world is temporary, you realize that stubbornly clinging to it is the root cause of your suffering. You quite literally think your way out of delusion.
Now, at this point, you've got faith, you have a calm mind, and you possess sharp wisdom. You're free from suffering. You might honestly think reaching this state of calm isolation is the end of the journey, right? But the text reveals a breathtaking twist.
Let's look at Section 5, the ultimate state, complete freedom. True enlightenment isn't about running away from the world, it is entirely about exactly how you choose to return to it. This brings us to liberation of the mind. The text makes such a beautiful point here. True liberation means you don't just stay isolated in a cave in the mountains. No, you descend back down. You return to the bustling, chaotic city. But you return changed. You actively share your enlightenment and use your newly found freedom to hold deep compassion and giving love for all beings, actively working to idealize the world around you.
The text uses this incredibly striking phrase, "love is like the wind," to perfectly capture this ideal state. What it means is living without that sticky, selfish attachment to the ego. Instead, you move through the world freely. You blow through society with a warm, transparent, and giving love that doesn't demand a single thing in return. You're in the world, you're helping the world, but you are absolutely no longer bound by it.
And at the absolute peak of this entire journey, known as complete liberation, or Ubbiyato Bhagavamukti, you transcend all physical constraints entirely. Through the absolute highest states of meditation, your self-awareness expands way beyond your physical body, beyond your arms, your legs, your senses, and you feel your life entirely merged with the boundless macrocosm. You literally become one with the life of the great universe itself.
It's just a massive shift in perspective, moving from our daily stressful anxieties to total union with the universe, simply by systematically untying the knots in our own minds. So, knowing that true freedom is found not in isolation, but in compassionate action, what step will you take on your mountain today? I really hope this explainer has given you a clear, structured roadmap to finding your own inner peace and true liberation in an otherwise chaotic world. Thank you so much for climbing with us today.
Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking some absolutely fascinating teachings from Chapter 7, What Are Demons? And I'll tell you right now, this text is a total game changer for how we look at spiritual obstacles. I mean, have you ever felt this massive, almost unexplainable pushback right when you were on the verge of a huge breakthrough? Well, as we'll see, there's a very specific reason for that. We're looking at a framework here that completely challenges modern assumptions and takes us deep into the hidden mechanics of spiritual growth.
So it brings up this really provocative question.
Why do the greatest spiritual obstacles appear right before enlightenment? According to the source material, the most intense attacks literally happen just as you're about to cross the finish line. The text points to the historical account of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, meditating under the Bodhi tree. It wasn't during his early beginner years that he faced the ultimate obstruction. It was right before his final realization. Why then, right? Why does the resistance absolutely peak just before the breakthrough? Keep this in the back of your mind, because the answer is going to completely change how you interpret your own moments of intense struggle. The foundational text we're exploring today is the Silent Buddha, which dives into the profound, often unspoken realities of spiritual practice. And specifically, we're zooming right in on the chapter that confronts the concept of Mara. These are the forces that actively attempt to derail your progress.
To map out our explainer, we've got a quick 4-part agenda. First, the reality of demons. Second, exploiting the ego. Third, weapons of defense. And finally, the philosophy of emptiness.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the reality of demons beyond mere metaphors. Stepping away from those clinical definitions of the mind we're so used to, there is a stark dissonance here. We're entering a much broader, multidimensional view of reality. Today, it's super common to just reduce all our internal struggles to psychological metaphors. We call them our shadows, our neuroses, or honestly, just stress. But the source text makes a huge pivot. It asserts that these demons, or Mara, are actual external spiritual entities. Yeah, you heard that right. They aren't just a bad mood or some internal delusion. They're active, conscious forces that deliberately seek out practitioners to tempt, confuse, and completely obstruct them. The text uses this highly grounded, honestly kind of visceral analogy, comparing these entities to cockroaches that desperately try to stop the light simply because they can only operate in the shadows. It's like this. Think about a person on the verge of enlightenment, or even just a major positive shift in their life as a rising sun. Right before that sun fully breaches the horizon, the creatures of the dark absolutely panic. They know that once you reach that state of bright, enlightened awareness, their influence is obliterated. So they become incredibly active and aggressive right before the dawn, desperately trying to keep you in the dark.
Moving on to Section 2, exploiting the ego, the mechanism of demonic attack.
So the crucial point here is understanding exactly how these entities actually gain access to us. They don't just randomly strike out of nowhere. They need a foothold, a point of entry. These spiritual entities feed on negative thoughts, like gasoline, and they specifically exploit our deeply relatable human vulnerabilities. We're talking about the desire for honor, vanity, and that burning urge for self-display. The text is super clear about this. You actually draw these forces in through imbalances, like unresolved anger or constant dissatisfaction. Basically, these vulnerabilities act like a homing beacon. You've got the demons of your own mind, your own internal greed or frustration. And these internal issues literally light the lantern that signals the external spiritual demons, drawing them right to you. They use your desire for worldly recognition as their fuel.
And honestly, here is where their strategy becomes truly terrifying. They don't just attack you with fear. They use seductive flattery. They whisper into the crevices of a proud ego to pull you entirely off the path. If they know you desperately want to be spiritually great, they'll pose as beings of light. They'll whisper things like, "You are a great Buddha. You have a great mission." And here's the catch. If a practitioner has even the slightest crack of vanity or self-conceit, they'll swallow this flattery whole. They'll start believing they're having some divine revelation, when in reality, they've just invited Mara right through the front door.
So what do we do about it? Section 3, weapons of defense, practical tools for spiritual combat. Knowing this reality, we have to look at our decisive weapons of defense. And no, we aren't talking about physical swords here, but profound shifts in perspective. How do we actually close the door on these forces? Well, the author provides a highly practical checklist, emphasizing that keeping a grounded view of yourself leaves zero room for demonic flattery to take root. Number 1, thorough, unwavering humility. This is your baseline armor. And number 2, which I find brilliantly pragmatic, objective verification of your actual achievements. If an ego-driven thought tells you that you're a grand enlightened master, you have to immediately look at your actual track record. What have you practically accomplished? How many people have you truly helped? Grounding yourself in cold, hard reality completely shatters the illusion of vanity. In fact, the text gives us a specific metric. It says we should purposefully evaluate our own achievements at only about 70 to 80% of their actual value, maintaining a buffer of deep humility. I think this is such a fascinating, actionable piece of advice.
By deliberately undervaluing your greatness just a little bit, you eliminate the gap where arrogance grows. You're intentionally keeping your ego slightly deflated. Because think about it, if you believe you're operating at 100%, you're ripe for a fall. Keeping your self-assessment at 80% means there is absolutely zero room for the demon of pride to latch on.
Which brings us to Section 4, the philosophy of emptiness, the ultimate spiritual shield. This is the ultimate overarching solution proposed in the text. If humility and objective verification are your tactical weapons, the philosophy of emptiness is your impenetrable fortress. By recognizing that all things are temporary, we literally stop building the ego structures that these external demons use as footholds. Emptiness, or ku in Buddhist philosophy, doesn't mean nothingness. It's not nihilism. It means understanding that worldly honors, fame, and even our own rigid sense of self are fluid and ultimately fleeting. When you consciously return your worldly attachments and desires to zero, you dismantle the psychological scaffolding that demons climb. Without your vanity or greed to feed on, their attacks simply have no target. You're removing the very bait that attracts them in the first place.
I absolutely love this imagery because it turns a kind of terrifying concept into this wildly empowering realization. The text says, a mind practicing emptiness is like a polished block of gold, leaving no cracks or crevices for demons to hook their claws into. Imagine that for a second. A demon literally trying to scratch at a perfectly smooth, shining block of gold. There's no texture, no rough edge of anger, no tiny crack of vanity for them to grab onto. Your mind becomes so fundamentally sound, so totally devoid of sticky attachments, that their attacks just slide right off. But of course, to maintain that beautifully polished state, the text makes it clear you have to pair this philosophy with an unshakable faith and a commitment to continuous, diligent effort every single day. This isn't just a one-and-done fix. It's the active, daily process of crushing your own internal seeds of illusion. You have to actively dissolve your worldly calculations of loss and gain and relentlessly focus on self-improvement. Faith and diligent effort, those are the twin engines that keep the mind perfectly polished. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to really challenge how you view your own internal hurdles from here on out. Ask yourself, what demons might currently be feeding on the hidden vulnerabilities of your ego? Are there moments right now where a sudden surge of pride or maybe a deep sense of unearned grievance is actually serving as an open door? By applying thorough humility, objectively verifying our reality, and practicing the profound philosophy of emptiness, we can slam those doors shut for good and step fully into the light of our true potential. Keep polishing that block of gold,